The Iron Dome is saturated. When over 100 targets across Israeli territory are struck in a single coordinated barrage, the conversation is no longer about defense. It is about what comes next. Iran's new leadership has authorized the largest single-wave missile and drone strike against Israel in recorded history, targeting military installations, air defense nodes, and intelligence infrastructure across at least 7 distinct zones. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is a declaration of operational reach that reshapes the entire Middle Eastern security architecture overnight. There is a tactical detail buried in this strike's targeting pattern that most analysts have not publicly addressed. And there is a historical parallel to a collapsing empire that mirrors this exact escalation with disturbing precision. A direct financial consequence is heading for your household within the next 60 days. Stay through every layer of this analysis because the mainstream narrative is already wrong, and I will show you exactly where it fractures. If this is the kind of analysis that reaches you before events hit the mainstream cycle, subscribe now. This channel tracks the collapse signals that empires ignore until it is too late. According to the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Iran's ballistic missile inventory exceeds 3,000 units, including the Emad and Fatah series platforms, with reported ranges surpassing 1,400 kilometers and terminal guidance systems, engineered to defeat layered interception. SIPRI's 2024 yearbook confirms that Iran now fields the largest and most diverse missile arsenal in the Middle East, a stockpile purpose-built to overwhelm multi-tier defense architectures like Israel's Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems through sheer saturation volume and simultaneous multi-axis engagement. RAND Corporation, modeling on saturation attacks, demonstrates that any missile defense network suffers catastrophic interception rate collapse when inbound threat volume exceeds designed engagement capacity within compressed time windows. The strike composition reportedly combined ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and one-way attack drones, a deliberate triad forcing defenders to split interceptor allocation across 3 distinct threat profiles at once. Satellite imagery from open-source intelligence platforms shows pre-strike repositioning of Iranian mobile launchers across western Iran and coordination signatures with forward positions in southern Lebanon, Syria, and western Iraq. Israel's Arrow 3 handles high-altitude ballistic threats with proven effectiveness, but when lower-tier batteries are simultaneously flooded with cruise and drone swarms, the interception math turns irreversibly against the defender. And that is what every major outlet completely missed. The targeting pattern reveals something far more calculated than retaliation. At least 3 strike corridors align with known Israeli early warning radar positions in the Negev and Golan Heights, meaning Iran's operational planners prioritize blinding Israel's detection architecture before potential follow-on waves, not simply hitting symbolic military targets. This is not the doctrine of a regime launching a protest strike. This is the behavior of a military preparing a contested battle space for sustained confrontation. And the difference between those 2 interpretations changes everything about what happens in the next 72 hours. The immediate question is whether Israel's multi-layered defense network sustained structural degradation or merely absorbed surface damage repairable within days. If key radar nodes were even temporarily disrupted, Iran has carved open a detection gap that alters the calculus for every regional actor before the weekends. Within 48 hours of the strike, Brent crude futures surged past $105 per barrel, and maritime insurers began repricing transit risk through the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point carrying roughly 20% of the world's daily oil throughput. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar activated emergency diplomatic backchannels not out of solidarity with either side, but because a sustained Iran-Israel exchange threatens to shatter the Gulf economic architecture they spent a decade constructing. Turkey repositioned naval assets into the eastern Mediterranean and activated additional air defense batteries along its southern border within hours of the first wave. European energy markets, already fractured by the ongoing Russia-Ukraine supply disruption, now face a second simultaneous shock corridor that the European Central Bank has no remaining monetary instruments to absorb. I want you to answer this in the comments. Do you believe this strike sequence ends with a single exchange? Or are we watching the opening phase of a sustained multi-front escalation? Drop your answer below and tell me what signal you're reading that the mainstream coverage is ignoring. Pull the lens back further, because this pattern carries a historical name. In the final decades of the Ottoman Empire, simultaneous military overextension across the Balkans, the Caucasus, and the Arabian Peninsula created a resource hemorrhage that no diplomatic maneuvering or alliance restructuring could reverse. The empire did not collapse because it lost a single decisive battle. It collapsed because it bled across every frontier simultaneously while its economic foundation eroded from within. What we are witnessing now carries that identical structural signature: a dominant power underwritten by the world's reserve currency and a global network of over 750 military installations, being forced to allocate capacity across Ukraine, the Indo-Pacific, the Red Sea, and now a potentially full-spectrum Middle Eastern escalation at the same time. The Ottoman treasury attempted to finance simultaneous campaigns through foreign debt and currency debasement, and the result was sovereign default, territorial fragmentation, and the end of 6 centuries of imperial continuity. The signal is the same, only the names have changed. Now let me make this personal, because this conflict is not a strategic abstraction unfolding on the far side of your screen. If Strait of Hormuz, shipping premiums rise by even 15% on a sustained basis. The downstream effect reaches your fuel pump within 3 weeks and your grocery shelf within 6. Defense procurement acceleration means your government redirects fiscal capacity away from domestic infrastructure, healthcare funding, and pension stability toward emergency military expenditure that generates zero civilian economic return. Your retirement portfolio, if you hold broad index funds, and statistically most of you watching this do, carries direct exposure to global energy equities, shipping logistics firms, and sovereign debt instruments that are all repricing in real time as this escalation deepens. The people in your life need to understand what is approaching before it reaches their daily routine, and they have no framework to interpret why everything suddenly costs more and moves slower. Out, not to frighten them, but to give them the 30-day head start that the evening news cycle will never provide. There is one additional signal I've been tracking that did not appear in any of the initial strike reporting. Intelligence community observers have flagged a significant surge in encrypted communication traffic between Tehran and Beijing over the past 72 hours. A pattern that historically precedes coordinated economic shielding operations, not military ones. If China is preparing to provide Iran with financial cover, whether through expanded sanctioned oil purchases, alternative payment settlement infrastructure, or United Nations Security Council veto protection, this conflict exits the regional category entirely and enters the domain of great power systemic confrontation. The question I cannot yet answer, and the one that will define the next phase of this crisis, is whether Washington interprets Beijing's posture as diplomatic mediation or as strategic alignment against Western interests. That single interpretation reshapes the global order. I will cover that development in the next analysis, because what Beijing does in the next 14 days may matter more than what Tehran did last night. Tell me in the comments, do you believe China will shield Iran economically? Or will Beijing stay neutral to protect its own trade relationships with the West? Explain your reasoning below, because the sharpest strategic thinking on this channel consistently comes from this audience. Remember the first line of this analysis? The Iron Dome is saturated. You now understand that sentence is not about a single weapon system on a single night. It is a diagnosis of an entire strategic posture being overwhelmed across every dimension simultaneously. If you want to track these signals before they reach the mainstream headlines, subscribe now and activate notifications. Hitting the like button surfaces this analysis for the people searching for answers right now, and if this breakdown delivered clarity you are not finding elsewhere, watch the next video in the Empire Collapse Signals playlist for the full examination of what happens when great powers fight on too many fronts at once.